Whether you are thinking about writing a story, writing a piece of description, or writing a piece of non-fiction text like a letter or an article, then it's important to vary your sentences creatively to show that you are a confident writer. This video is all about word order within sentences and making sure that the first word of each of your sentences or the first word of each of your paragraphs is confidently constructed, which means that you vary the way in which you begin your sentences. For this video, I'm going to be talking about two different groups of words which you can consider in order to give the impression that you are writing creatively, confidently, and also in a compelling way. We're going to start by talking about prepositions and connectives, which are sometimes called discourse markers, and then we're going to move on to verbs, adjectives, and adverbs as a way to begin sentences. And for this video, I'm going to be using a selection of pictures as well. First thing I want to show you is a list of prepositions and connectives. Some of these you might already be familiar with already, but these are effective. These are an effective way of beginning your sentences, or some of them, because it shows that you can sequence and link your sentences together. So you have prepositions in here like above, below, behind, opposite, next to, in front of. But you also have prepositions and connectives in here to do with sequence, like firstly, secondly, thirdly, consequently, additionally, furthermore, and so on. So using some of these words would be an effective way to show that confidence as a writer. What we're trying to avoid here is students falling into the pitfall of always using the same word to begin every single sentence, like the, for example, which can make your sentences sound like a list. So those are some prepositions and some discourse markers there. So we're going to be using some of those first in relation to an image. So here we have an image of a musician, and I want you to imagine that this is the image that comes up for the descriptive task for paper 1. And I want you to use the musician as the central focus of the image and think about where everything is in the image in relation to him. And on the right hand side we have 7 prepositions: behind, above, beneath, in front of, opposite, beside, and amongst. What I'm going to show you in this first example is how we can use those prepositions as the first word of 7 sentences to show the confidence in how we construct a sentence in terms of the word order. So here we go. These are just the beginnings, so you could develop these more, which is what the ellipsis is designed to show you. Amongst all the people in the park this sunny afternoon in June stood a man playing a violin under the shade of a large tree. Its limbs reached out from the trunk like giant arms. Behind the violinist, an ancient oak tree's branches fanned out, printing patterns of dappled sunlight on the path. Above the violinist, umbrellas of feathery leaves fluttered in the breeze. Beneath the man's feet, a single hat collected glistening change from passers-by. In front of the man, the park buzzed with sunbathers. Opposite the violin player, people seated themselves lazily to admire the views of the parkland. Beside the musician, skyscrapers dominated the skyline. So I would develop those more, I would describe things more in each of those gaps, but you can see here we have used those prepositions all to begin sentences, and that shows our confidence as a writer that we can change word orders and also talk about where things are in relation to other things, creating that sense of place that we are trying to establish for the reader. So now it's your turn. Here we have a different image. I want you to use the man seated at the table at the front drinking as the central focus and think about where everything is in relation to him in the image using the 7 prepositions below. So we have behind, above, in front of, next to, on top of, in spite of, and under. So you can pause the video now and have a go at writing 7 sentences with each of those prepositions at the beginning, or you can carry on watching this video and I can show you some possible examples. Here we have the examples. On top of the man's table, a single donut rested half-eaten next to his cup of tea, purchased from the nearest bakery. In spite of the constant hum of traffic, he rather liked this secluded spot. Under his feet, the shadows created by the trees danced with the patches of tropical sunlight. Behind the man, tourists perched on small metal seats, eating and drinking. Above him, the clear sunlight began to pierce through the thick canopy of leaves. In front of the man, groups of tourists clutched their cameras tight as they walked to the next photo opportunity. Next to his table, a woman cuddled her small dog intimately in her lap. You can see it there on kind of being cuddled. So again, we have 7 prepositions, and because they are starting the sentence, it means that our writing is a lot more confident and compelling. We've also got some lovely devices in there as well, metaphors, personification, etc. So the vocabulary is lovely as well. But this video is all about the first word of every sentence or every paragraph. How can you vary it in order to be more confident as a writer? Here again we have 7 examples. I want to now move on to adjectives, verbs and adverbs, and there's a box there at the bottom which reminds you in a very brief way what each of these word types are. We have an image of 2 women at what looks like to be a marketplace fruit stall. On the right hand side we have 4 sentences, but if you look at the first word of each sentence, they each begin with the word the. And like I said earlier, this is a common pitfall that some students get into, which means that their writing actually ends up sounding a bit like a list. They're literally just listing what they can see or, what they sense. So we need to change these sentences in order to make them more compelling and confident to read. It's okay to start some sentences with the, of course. Of course that's okay, but you don't want to do it repeatedly. So let's use adjectives, verbs and adverbs to make these sentences more compelling. So busy and crowded, the marketplace was flooded with the succulent smells of the fruit stall. We have 2 adjectives there, followed by a comma. Carefully, customers pondered which fruit to buy or which to devour for lunch. We have an adverb there, followed by a comma. Displaying a vast array of colours, the fruit stall looked like an artist's palette with brushstrokes of red and orange. We have a verb there. And another verb at the bottom, looking like large shiny marbles, the apples appeared especially tempting. So already those sentences sound more interesting because we're using our knowledge of language to vary the sentence order and put the adverb, verb or adjective at the front. Let's look at a different image now, and you might get something like this in the exam, which is slightly more cartoony, or a painting, or something like this. We're going to here practice both prepositions and word types, like verbs and adjectives, with a list of words there that you have on the right-hand side. So we have opposite, below, above, next to, floating, rotating, alongside, and idyllically. And we're going to try and use each of those words to begin 7 different sentences. You can pause the video now and have a go yourself, or you can simply continue watching and I can give you some examples. So here we have our examples using each of those words from the previous slide to begin. Opposite the magnificent windmill, meadows were divided into sections by hedges. Below the turning blades, reflections bled into the river. Above, geese flew beneath a mauve and pink sky. Next to the windmill, trees bloomed in a variety of colours, from deep reds to burning oranges. Floating by a small pier, a solitary boat was moored. Rotating languidly, the wooden blades turned, caressed by the gentle summer breeze. Alongside the river, wildflowers grew. Idyllically, a small cottage sat nestled under the windmill, that had roses and ivy growing up its walls, framing the front door. So again, I could develop those further, which is what the ellipsis is designed to show. But you can see, because we've used a mixture of prepositions, connectives, verbs, adjectives and adverbs to begin our sentences, it sounds much more confident, much more compelling, which means much more interesting to read. So in your piece of writing, whether it's descriptive, narrative, or non-fiction, I would encourage you to think about the words that you use to begin sentences and to vary them to show your confidence as a writer.